unboatsed Jell-O. That's an intriguing title. Also takes in rubber plantations, car building, Formula One, ice hockey, balloon jumping, surrealism, world records, figure skating and water skiing along the way. Okay, so what have we got here? We've got Noel Macklin. We've got his daughter Natter. Got his son Lance. You may have heard of Lance. Yeah. And this is Mia. And we're also going to take a quick look at Violet Caudry, who's very closely associated with the family. Okay, so Fairmile Cottage. There it is, just across the road. This is the house, the original house you saw on those maps. All this is Noel Macklin's motorworks at the back. And we'll find out how they came about shortly. If you come down here, this road, entrance road, just see the corner of it there. That is the lodge house. And I've done a modern overview, which I'm not sure works terribly well, what it looks like today. And you've got the school, the Cobham Free School, is exactly on the site of the house. The house probably being about there at the front of the building as it stands today. The lodge house is still there, still in existence, and that's the entrance to the Fairmile where you're sitting today. So when you go out tonight, take a look to your left and you'll see the lodge house there, which is fairly central to our story. Okay, there it is. That is the lodge at Fairmile. That is really all that's left of that estate now. Everything else is just gone. But there is a blue plaque on the wall if you walk around the side, which the Invicta car company put on in 2001, which marks what the place basically was. You absorb that for a moment. And then we move on, because there's a lot to get through. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Albert Noel Campbell Macklin. His story actually begins in Australia, where he was born of Irish parents on the 28th of October 1886. His father was a lawyer practicing in Perth. Came back to the UK when Noel was 10 years old, and he's about 10 years old in this picture. This is Noel, and that's his brother Cecil. The dad wanted them to have a good education. That meant going to Eton. So this is why he's looking like an Eton boy, basically, because he's being prepped to go up. Charles, who is his dad, he's a well-known barrister, and the family lived in quite good premises at Albert Hall Mansions, next to the Albert Hall. But Noel didn't do too well at Eton, and he actually withdrew from there at the age of 15 before he took any exams, and he had to later take the school certificate. However, the family moved to Elm Park Gardens here in Chelsea in 1901. And I think this is the original 1901 building. It's still there. Cecil, the brother, the younger brother, he kept pigeons on the roof up here. Noel, being Noel, kept a lion. Yeah, it was only a cub when he got it, but you know, as these things do, they grow. And it grew, and it roared, and it scared half the neighbourhood to death. I always thought a wild animal was on the loose. His parents didn't know about this, but he had to admit to it in the end, and said, "You can't keep it up there, it's ridiculous." So they had to get an apparatus up here to actually lower it down. Why they couldn't have walked it down the stairs, I'm not quite sure, but they lowered it off the roof to the ground, where Noel took it to London Zoo, thinking, "Oh, London Zoo will want another lion." Didn't want it. So he had to walk it again to a circus in Battersea, and they did take it. They took the lion. So that kind of shows the sort of bloke or lad that he was. We're sort of building into, really. bit of a fuzzy photo there, but he played ice hockey from the age of 16 at Prince's Club in Knightsbridge, and that led to him becoming a member of the England ice hockey team. And we can see him here in 1910. He's in Switzerland playing for England. That's Noel there. How do we know that's Noel in such a fuzzy picture? Because he's got a big black bandage on his knee. And it damaged his knee quite badly. Still played with it though, and it caused him a lot of pain. So yeah, it wasn't too great. And the career kind of faltered out after that. So instead of playing ice hockey, he bought and sold Malaysian rubber shares. He bought them very low. Malaysian rubber was just becoming popular for things like rubber gloves. This was before World War One, and using today's money, when he sold those shares, again before World War One, he made £5 million profit. So that was his start, basically. That enabled him to have a good start in life. Bought a house in Park Lane, became part of the shooting, hunting, fishing set. And it was whilst he was sort of partaking in all this, he went to a hunt in Scotland led by a chap called Hugh Orr Ewing. And also on that hunt was Esme Stewart, this lady here. And that is Hugh Orr Ewing there. So he actually married her in 1911. Just prior to that, he was prosecuted for speeding at Felton Magistrates Court. And because he was about to get married a week later to Esme, they let him off.
Times change.
Friends in high places and influence from those. The rumour, and I haven't been able to prove this one, but I've heard stories about him. He drove the Fiat Mephistopheles, which you probably all heard of. And this was a car that he did drive at Brooklands. The rumour is that he was driving that up Kingston Hill, approaching 100 miles an hour. So that's when I got done for speeding, I think. But Esme also competed in the same car, the size of Fiat Mephistopheles, big old car. But Esme also drove that car at Brooklands. He also, Noel, this is also raised horses, but he stopped after one broke its leg at Sandown and it upset him. He went big game hunting in Africa and he took up cine photography, which is not that sort of well known at the time, really. And we'll see a little bit later what became of his big game hunting. He did make films of his African trips, but they were all lost during World War One. So don't want anything. He was commissioned in 1907 at the age of 21 in the Kent Militia, and then later as a lieutenant in the Royal Horse Artillery. Okay. He fought in France during World War One. He was injured at the First Battle of Ypres, and he came back to the UK, worked in the War Office and training in Cairo. They put it down to he suffered from concussion, probably PTSD as we know it today, but he was invalided out in 1915. He was also diagnosed at that time with rheumatism or arthritis. And that plagued him for the rest of his life. We think that was from being in the war. When he got back, he joined the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve and he was on the Dover Straits Patrol. Okay. He actually divorced Esme in 1917 and she went on to marry Hugh Orr Ewing in 1922. But instead, Noel married Leslie Cordery. This is an older picture of them. They're actually going away to an Eton ball in this picture. But yeah, a little bit later on that one. I couldn't really find any pictures of her as a young person. Leslie Cordery. Cawdrey's do come into this story quite a lot. She had 3 sisters, Maurice, Evelyn and Violette. Their mother was a lady called Bertha Petit. Their father, Henry, sometimes known as Henry Lane or Henry Cawdrey, or Henry Lane Cawdrey. It's all a bit mixed up, but he was a tobacconist, initially in London and then in Cobham, which I'm guessing is where Noel met them. They lived in a house called Glen Gareth, which was on the Wisley Road out of Cobham. I haven't actually been able to trace where that house was or is at the moment. Anyone knows Glen Gareth? No. He did have children, and we'll come to those at the end of the talk because it's quite interesting. Another of the exploits was this: balloon jumping. I think the idea was you hang about here underneath a balloon and you jumped to see how far you could get. So you would launch yourself up, the balloon would take you off, and then you'd go floating off and land somewhere. It was actually very profitable for Noel. He's always wanted to make money. He successfully flew over Olympia in a balloon, and the balloon was disguised as a woman. So there was a bloke inside it, and then over the top there was a woman's dress and a woman's head, and a sort of giant woman basically. So he jumped over Olympia, landed the other side, to publicise the International Women's Exhibition of 1922. Do you know how much he got paid for that? £190,000 in today's money. For jumping over Olympia. Okay. Obviously quite profitable. Okay, something else that was quite profitable. After World War I, Noel went to Monaco to recuperate. Took a villa in Menton nearby and took up a suite, I guess, or a whole floor, in fact, I think it was, in the Hotel de Paris. Why did he do that? Well, he had a theory, and he loved his theories, Noel. He had this theory that he became obsessed with the law of chance, and he wanted to prove his theory on the roulette wheel. So back then, they actually published 100 days, or every day they published all the numbers on the roulette wheel that came up during that day's play. He had a pamphlet with all these numbers in. So he took 100 days worth of these pamphlets, got walls of his hotel suites covered in graphs, plotted all the numbers, the blacks and reds, for 100 days, and he ended up with what looked like a waveform. So where they were all coming together, that was going to be the next number. Did it work? Yes. It did work. And he made a lot of money again. He had staff, he had family there, he had professional gamblers in the casino. He would ring the gamblers up and say, put your money on 14 red. Right, okay. They go off and do that and they'd win. The director obviously was a bit suspicious about this. And he went to Mr. Macklin and says, what are you doing? Yeah. So Macklin showed in his hotel suite all these graphs laid out. It was amazing. And told him how he did it, basically. And the director let him carry on.
Really?
Yeah. Because Noel had promised he would not publish this at all. It was just to prove his own theory. And he did this for 6 months. And that 6 months paid for 6 months of the hotel floor, the Hotel de Paris in Monaco, and a villa on the outskirts, and keep them all going, and all the staff. Which I knew I had into that. But what did come of it was they stopped publishing those numbers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we couldn't do it anymore, really. Not unless you stood there watching all day. Okay, so that's basically the early life of Noel Macklin, how he made his money, how he was sort of always looking for things that were different to do, which brings us on to cars. Hooray, you say. We're on to cars at last. So, post-World War One, he'd been to Monaco, he'd been doing all this fantastic stuff over there, came back to the UK, met up with his mate Or Ewing again, and they talked about what to do next. Both of them were motoring enthusiasts, and they thought of building a car using their two middle names, Eric and Campbell. So hence we got the Eric Campbell. Anyone heard of the Eric Campbell?
No.
No? Okay. They had no knowledge of car design or manufacturing, but they pressed ahead, inspired by the Bean Motor Company. You've probably all heard of Bean. They were actually pretty big at the time. They were as big as Austin and Morris, and they were sort of vying them. So they were quite a big company back then. The founder was a chap called Basil Clark, and he was in the Royal Artillery as well in India at the same time as Or Ewing and Macklin. So we think that's how the connection was made. The cars themselves were made at a Handley Page factory in Cricklewood, and they were made from redundant Swift chassis. There were some bespoke enhancements, and a Coventry Simplex engine was put in them. They were basically a subcontractor of Bean. About 100 of these are believed to have been made, and Macklin had about 50 of them at his house at Glengarriff at one point. He was keen on marketing, obviously, and also keen on a pretty face. And there's one, and that's Kathleen Sprake, who was the first lady he got to demonstrate and drive his cars. I won't mention her yet. She comes into the story a little bit later. But here she's seen on a 25,000 mile trip through Europe and Africa in an Eric Campbell. Now they did that. You can see 25,000 miles on the side. They did this to promote the cars and try and sell them, prove how reliable they were. And it was quite a thing in the 20s and 30s to do these endurance records and feats. So this was really the start of that for Noel, with Kathleen at the wheel. Problem was, Handley Page fell out with Bean over unpaid bills, and Eric Campbell failed along with that because they were inextricably linked with Bean. So the money went, and that was basically it really for the Eric Campbell. A few more were made by a company called Vulcan in Southall around 1926. But again, Noel's interest after this failure just sort of gone. He's always looking for the next thing. So the next thing was the Silver Hawk. This is at Glengarriff, and that lady there is Violette Caudry. So he'd already been down the tobacconists, and he'd met the four sisters down there by this time, and they're at his house in the Wisley Road. The Silver Hawk was supposed to be a sports racing car. It was built in sheds at his house in Wisley Road. Got another thing coming up with that. He engaged a chap called William Watson to help with the design and build, and they ran with a 1500cc Sage engine. The cars were driven at Brooklands and other races by George Duller. You know George Duller? One of the Bentley boys. So he was in their orbit as well. Macklin himself and Violette Caudry also raced them at Brooklands. It was a bit of a limited market and not a commercial success. So not very many of these were actually made. And Bean were actually still selling a few Eric Campbells off as well at the same time, so that didn't really help matters too much. So again, that kind of faltered, didn't really get anywhere. But there we are. There's June 1920. There's Violet in a Silver Hawk. Looks a bit more like a race car, that one, than the other one did, I think. Around about that time when the Silver Hawk had failed, Noel was racing, but he became friends with Oliver Lyle of Tate and Lyle fame, who was a resident over there on Fairmile. Noel was very good at talking to people, persuading them to part with their money, as we've already seen. So hence Oliver Lyle invested in his next venture, and Orr Ewing was involved as well. He was the principal investor for the Eric Campbell, and he continued to invest in the Invicta. Now we're getting on to the big things now. This was his next venture. Basically, Noel had offered to produce a Top Gear car for Lyle's wife, so she didn't have to change gear. And that's kind of how it all came about. So he invested in the Invicta, and that's where a lot of the money came to build those sheds that we saw at the back of Fairmile Cottage. He needed more room to build his cars. He was building the Silver Hawk at Glengarriff, not enough room in the sheds there. So he moved to the bigger house over there, and he had to build motor sheds. So Oliver Lyle, very wealthy, funded that. He also funded building the lodge at the entrance. He was in with the Brooklyn set. Parry Thomas was a friend. He was an early buyer of the Invictas, and he raced one at Brooklands. It was quite a good car, 924, 25 we're talking here. 2 litre, 6-cylinder engine. There was a 4-seat Tourer coachwork on it. William Watson was a chassis designer, and he bought a chassis down from Birmingham, on which the car was built. Macklin also met Henry Meadows. Meadows 2.5 litre, 6-cylinder engines were put in the cars. So quite a lot of stuff sort of going on there. They were actually sold for £595 for the short chassis and £630 for the long. And the bodies by the coach builders were extra. So, when they got to the 3 litre Meadows engine, the chassis was too flimsy. So Watson designed a completely new chassis to put the 3 litre engine on. That was quite a successful car. In July 25, entered the West Kent meeting at Brooklands. Violette was driving, she came first. Oliver Lyle was driving another one, he came second in that meet. So we're doing quite well at that point. So we're going to take the first of a few diversions. Violette Caudry. There she is. And you can see some of the achievements that she actually got for herself there. And we're just going to sort of skip through her. She was obviously a friend of Noel. Noel had married her sister, Leslie. So this is how it all came together. Violet employed a chap called Cushy Cushman. Anyone heard of him? Fraser, great name, but he's a Fraser Nash employee. But he'd been made redundant. So I think that is Cushy in the car there with her, because he went to Monza. And again, this is talking about the records, world records they were trying to break, endurance, to prove how good the cars were. They went to Monza, 1926. They got 4 international and 33 Italian records, world records and Italian records out there. When they got back, the car was exhibited at Selfridges in London. So, this is publicity. Central London, big thing going on. More records were also broken at Brooklands in this car and at Monteleri in that year. And this was the first time that Violette won the RAC's Duar Trophy. Now, as a result of Violette, in fact, taking Cushman to Monza Noel gave him a job over here as the works manager. So he came into the firmament at that point. The car's success, they were producing quite a lot of these by this time, just over the road, but they needed more space again. There's no space over there, so they went to a factory, Beverley Barnes, in Barnes. So that's where the bulk of the cars were made, the Invictas, and they were brought back down here for electric works, instruments to be put in, and the servicing was carried out in the works at the Fairmile, just over there. This is another of these endurance things for lots of publicity. 1927, and we can see Violet here in the lovely fur coat, and this is her friend and nurse, E.H. Simpson. They're demonstrating the side tent on this Invicta because they're about to go round the world. They took Mr. Hatcher as a mechanic, and they also took an RAC observer with them. So there are 4 in the car doing this trip. This trip actually gained a lot of publicity again at the time, and won Violet her second Duar trophy, which is the only person to this day to win that trophy for ladies' achievement in motorsport. She's the only person ever to win it twice. Okay, so there we are. That was about 10,000 miles they did on this trip on the boat, and of course land, obviously. That was an Invicta 3 litre they were using there. And just another little picture of them there, stuck in the mud somewhere. So it wasn't all plain sailing. Did get hit by another car once and had to rebuild that car as well halfway around. So good job they took a mechanic with them, I think. But the Invicta had obviously proved itself pretty reliable, and that's what they wanted. This is another thing they did. More publicity stunts, basically. This is at Brooklands here, and they're doing 30,000 miles in 30,000 minutes, going round the Brooklands track 10,000 times. They did. And actually they couldn't do it at night, so it took 21 days to actually do that. But they did it, and they got themselves a whole load of publicity. Violet is with her sister here. This is Evelyn Cordray. She drove as well, but not quite as much as Violet did. And that leads to this sort of thing, running on castor oil, so that they would be paying Noel loads of dosh for these achievements, basically. As I said, it's very good at making money. Right. So, the Invicta was doing all right, but Noel was starting to get itchy feet again, and he was running down the premises across the road. He was letting the fitters go, and also let his chassis designer, William Watson, go. Cars were being built over at Barnes. There was some really vicious price cutting going on at that time, and it made making a cheap Invicta actually unviable to make. So again, it sort of petered out. But Macklin had been making friends at Brooklands with Reed Railton and the Brooklands set, including Thompson and Taylor's. We'll just finish off with Violet. So there's Violet at home in the lodge, just there, with some of her trophies. It's a big one. And this is Violet marrying Johnny Hindmarsh, who was a racing driver. He actually won Le Mans in 1935. But he married her. I think this is at Fairmile Cottage over here. How old is Johnny? 50? Any more ideas? You're going to be amazed when I tell you. 35, and you're laughing. 24.
Oh no!
24 years old in that picture. Violet was the older woman. She was 31. I couldn't believe it, and I had to check this several times. And I found other pictures of Johnny Hindmarsh, and he always looked like 55. Unbelievable. But there we go. 24 years old. Basically, he died at 30. So, couldn't ever be 55. Yeah, just to mention that. He was a pilot and a racing driver. He was also in the tank corps as well. But he was a pilot for Hawkers, and when they were testing the Hawker in 1938, the Hurricane, they're flying one out of Brooklands. He believed that he became overcome with fumes in the cockpit and lost control. Straight to St George's Hill at 400 miles an hour. That was the end of poor old Johnny. It was really pretty much the end of Violette in her public appearances as well. She had actually given up motor racing, endurance stuff when she got married to Johnny. They had 2 children, so she was looking after them. One of those children was called Susan Hindmarsh, and she actually went on to marry Formula One driver Roy Salvadori. So, keeping it all there together, you know. Right, so let's move off of Violette. I like Violette, she's quite a good girl. Right, so where are we now? Oh yes, we're in the 1932 Alpine Rally. Invicta was in trouble, had the S-Type, which this is, flagship car, 100 miles an hour, but it failed. They only sold 67 of them. But it was successful. Donald Healy was one of the drivers in the Alpine rallies. He won the 1931 Monte Carlo rally in an S-Type. Raymond Mays was another one of his drivers. Competed. I think he came second. Right there. I can't find that bit. Oh yeah, he came second to Malcolm Campbell in a 1932 scratch race at Brooklands for the fastest cars of the year. So yeah, I mean, Invicta was pretty good. Anyone got an Invicta? No. Wasn't all good because Sammy Davis, probably heard of him, he actually crashed an S-Type at the 1931 Brooklands Easter Gathering. Wasn't too great, didn't get a lot of good publicity. No one doesn't like bad publicity. But anyway, Invicta ran down. So Macklin was looking around for something else to do, basically, and he decided to make his movie debut. Now, I mentioned he was into cine photography early on. Fancied himself as a Hollywood director. And I'm going to show you an edited version of the film that he made. Makes no sense whatsoever. But here we go. This is called Noel Duval, and the leading actor is Noel Macklin. All the family are in this film as well. I find it quite difficult to spot which is which. But yeah, all the Caudry sisters are in it. And his wife and everything. So it's lovely. I love it. But it makes no sense at all. So there we are. I mean, that's kind of his movie debut. In fact, this is his only movie that he made, because it was pretty awful. Yeah, I think that's what everyone said. Said, no, this is not a good idea. He actually had one professional actress in that who played one of the leading ladies. All the rest were his mates. Okay, there we go. A bit of fun there, I think. Again, though, he had itchy feet. So what was next? Oh, there we go. Fairly recent picture of Brooklyn. He was looking for another outlet. So the Hudson Terraplane 8 looked like another opportunity. This is a 1938 Hudson Terraplane 8, which was actually a bit later than he was dealing with. But it was the only one I could find at Brooklands. He'd made friends with Railton, who was pretty famous then because of the speed records, John Cobb, Malcolm Campbell, etc., etc. And you've all heard of Reed Railton, I think. And so anyway, Macklin set up an agreement to use Railton's name for his next project. And Railton signed the contract. He had no input into it, design-wise or anything. It was all Macklin, but just the Railton name because it was famous at the time. Hudson Terraplane. They had a factory on the Great West Road. And Macklin again persuaded his wealthy friends to invest, including Richard Shuttleworth of the Shuttleworth collection. He became a director. Hudson imported 2,000 cars a year, of which 200 were just chassis. So English coach builders could put their own touch on it, which is what Macklin did basically. He bought a Terraplane for Violette, and she loved it. She became part of the Terraplane 8 rally team. It was quite successful in Scotland. She came back to the Fairmile and said, "Oh, this is really good. Noel, you want to do something with this." And so he did. He did. And the Railton Terraplane was born. Nice looking thing, I have to say. That is actually a special one that was built for Richard Shuttleworth himself. It came up for auction not that long ago, and that's where that picture came from. So, the Fairmile Engineering Company now came into being. It was getting all a bit business-like now. And that linked Macklin, Railton, Thompson and Taylor's, and Hudson's at Chiswick together. So, there's another Terraplane. That one's at Brooklands. You may have seen it in the sheds there. Once used by Eric Ferniho, this one. Another Railton Terraplane, just for an example. And here we have some Terraplanes in the sheds, just over the back. And we've still got the old stag's heads, look. Still hanging about in there. That's how we know it's the sheds. The cars would basically come from Hudson's in Chiswick to the Fairmile, where they would have extra mechanical work done, including Macklin's own design radiator put in. The electrical instruments were installed. Then they would go off to various coach builders and then come back to the Fairmile again for finishing off. So next picture, I had hoped to have this car here tonight. Unfortunately, it got broken last week. Poor old Paul Tickner, I think he broke a spring on it. He was doing a run or rally or something with it. But yeah, that is a Railton Ranelagh after the coach builders that put this bodywork on. Note the RT there on the hubcaps and the RT on the front of the radiator there. Okay, so yeah, Ranelagh was a coach builder, but also built motor bodies, coachcraft, car bodies, also other coach builders that would make the cars. 224 Railtons at various types were produced in 1934, so this was getting reasonable. There was also a Railton Fairmile and a Railton Cobham, along with a Railton Sandown and a Railton. Cushman was still involved with the process, and he's seen here at Brooklands in a Railton Light Tourer in 1935. There's Cushy at the wheel there. So this is all very inextricably linked with Brooklands up the road. So in this picture here we see Macklin himself, and that's his son Lance, and that's Cushy Cushman at the back there in front of Fairmile Cottage. Shame they're not that down road. Railton. The advertising slogan was quite clever. It's quicker by rail, but it's quickest by Railton. There you are. Rolls-Royce were very worried about the Railton. It was threatening them, so they bought one and took it to bits and examined it. Again, they were quite good cars. John Charles touring bodies, top speed 90 miles an hour, sprightly acceleration. It was a drop head coupe and a saloon, as we've seen the saloon just now. The name Terraplane was actually dropped from Hudson and Railton models in 1934, hence that one was called the Ranelagh. And you had the Fairmile and Cobham and so on as well. They weren't called the Terraplane then, although they were basically Hudson Terraplanes. Okay. Problem was, every year Hudson were making bigger and bigger cars, and they were not suitable for the sort of sports tourers that Macklin was making. So towards the end of this, Macklin bought up 200 chassis from Hudson's, and that would continue the production because the following year they couldn't do it anymore because the Hudson chassis was too big. So it kept on another couple of years on making these. So by 1939, Macklin was looking to raise some more money again. So he actually didn't go to his friends this time, he made it a limited company. So he took it to market. Again, that was believed to be to raise money to develop his next project, which will bring us on to motorboats. Yeah, in the end, he did actually sell Railton to a company called Scott Motors, who made motorbikes. The 750cc engine for their motorbikes were rumoured to have been tried in an MG. Had to get an MG in somewhere. That was the only link I could possibly find. So there we are. He sold the entire company after the war in 1945 to Hudson Motors. Railton and Hudson's had designs to continue with Railton, but it didn't come to anything. It all sort of fell apart again. Right, which then brings us on to motorboats. Okay, so there we have Noel on a Fairmile motorboat. Okay, so Railton Hudson was failing because of the chassis sizes, and Macklin had picked up that the Navy were preparing for war, obviously at this time, and their preparedness was not too great with small motorboats. So he saw an opportunity there. And he saw an opportunity to make boats the way that he'd made motor cars. So with bits coming in basically from different places that were manufactured elsewhere and all put together. The idea was initially rejected by the Admiralty, but they did accede to it in the end. Because he realised they would be needed in large numbers for coastal defence, particularly. Macklin's arthritis actually was becoming quite bad at this time, and he would take meetings over here, and he would already, when people came in, he would be sitting at his desk because he was struggling with movement. So he would sit at his desk, wouldn't move much during the meeting, everyone would leave, and then he would go. So he was on the decline. However, he was friends with a chap called Vice Admiral Osborne, and developed this idea for a motor gunboat. And they started to produce these in wood on a flow line basis, similar to car production, where various firms, I said this brilliant, they produce the structures and send them to disparate boatyards around the country where they'd be assembled using tools that were provided over here at the Fairmile. He did provide a prototype ship. This was before he got the contract. And Reed Railton was involved in this. He went to America to find a suitable engine. A 600 horsepower Hallscott 31 litre V12. You know?
No.
Yeah?
I'm a marine engineer by trade.
Ah!
There was a lot of Fairmile Bs built.
There were. 800 or something. But yes, so there we are. So it had the V12 in there. Macklin obtained the sole rights to the engine at this time. The sheds here were being used for production, design, tooling, using prefabricated plywood. And the Admiralty finally agreed to Macklin's plan. Fairmile A-type was produced with an initial order of just 12 boats. but that soon increased, obviously, as they needed them. Staff for Macklin's Fairmile Marine went up to about 500 people. 200 were working across the road in those sheds again, and the house by this time, because the house had been requisitioned. There were 45 shipyards and 87 slipways around the country that were building these boats. So basically, Macklin remained managing director during the war period on the grand salary of £1 a year. But he did take a profit from the boats. So anyway, so let's get back to the A-type. There's the first one. And this is a little diversion to Woodnuts Boatyard. Now, the prototype that Noel was standing on in that picture was made at a place called Woodnuts Boatyard. Now, as we can see here, I have a personal connection here. Barney Woodnut was my 3 times great-grandfather. And he set up Woodnuts Boatyard in St Helens, a place called Dover, in 1853. He actually passed away shortly after that, and his son John here took the boatyard over until he actually passed away in 1905. So there we are, there's the boatyard. Actually still retained the Woodnuts name, and it's still got that name today. So you can see it on there. And they started building these luxury yachts. You can see some of them here. And that's the original boat yard and house over there, which is still there today. There's a Bermudan cutter, one of their posh boats. And again, that was a Woodnut, 1938 Bermudan cutter. Same sort of time that Noel was building that prototype in that boatyard. And there's me at Woodnuts Boatyard a couple of weeks ago. I got all excited when I walked around the corner and saw a blue plaque. I thought, oh, it's a blue plaque to my 3 times great-grandfather. No, it wasn't. It was to this bloke, Alfred Westmacott. And he bought the boatyard off of my family, off of the Woodnuts, in 1905, and developed this X1 motor yachts, which he got a blue plaque for by the Royal Motor Yacht Club. So I got all excited but deflated. Never mind. Right. So, other industries. I've said this already. We used to fabricate parts. There was a liner manufacturer for shafts, wire netting manufacturers built rudders, bell foundry built propellers, and so on and so forth. The timber for the frames was cut at a yard in Brentford. There was a central store, and the kits were actually sent out from there to the various boat yards. The non-wooden parts, machinery, the engines, was stored in number 4 store. Anyone know where number 4 store is? Thompson and Taylor's workshop at Brooklands. So another Brooklands connection. Other mechanicals, Hudson's were brought into it as well, the Great West Road. Macklin's staff involved his motoring people, Cushy Cushman, Admiral Osborne, and also Carol Holbeach from Thompson and Taylor, who was sent out to tour the country in a week to find all the small boatyards and small garages and machine shops to sign up for this enterprise. Various types were constructed. This is a D type, D class, motor gunboat, which had Packard engines in it. They were known as dog boats. They were locally built as well, and at the yards at Chertsey and Sunbury on the Thames. So, this sort of enterprise actually did reunite Archie Fraser-Nash and Cushy Cushman. They'd been separated since he got sacked from Fraser-Nash all those years ago, and they were reunited as part of this, when Fraser-Nash were developing powered gun turrets to put on the boats here, using Vickers machine guns. Connection up there. And this last one here, this is King George VI inspecting the D-Day invasion fleet in the Solent from a Fairmile boat. The king remarked to the lieutenant on board the boat that he must be proud of his ship. And the RNVR, remember Noel was RNVR as well, lieutenant replied that there'd be no boats at all if it wasn't for Noel Macklin. And 2 weeks later, Macklin was knighted. And various staff members of Fairmile Marine also received various honours, except for poor old Cushy Cushman. Shed a tear, really, as his parents were not married when he was born. So he couldn't get an honour. Over 800 Fairmile boats were constructed, but Macklin was restless again by the end of the war, and so he started designing prefabricated wooden houses. Started to work on this, but the arthritis was getting pretty bad by this time, and in fact nothing actually came of it. But he did become director of small boat dispersal when they were getting rid of all the boats at the end of the war. So he was directing what would happen to them. A lot of them became houseboats until they rotted away because they made them. Not many around these days, I don't think. Fairmile Marine was sold, and it did continue in the 50s and 60s. This is their headquarters on the Fairmile. It's not Fairmile Cottage. I think, is it Green Lane, the other side of Fairmile Lane? It's over there somewhere. So, yeah, it did carry on, but that was it, really. Noel was getting pretty bad, as I said. So he bought a villa back in the south of France again, at Menton, which is where he was in his Monaco days. And he died out there in 1946. Body was brought back to the UK. He was cremated over at Woking, and at his funeral there was a huge wreath of violets there. I think he was pretty close to that. Okay, so that's really the end of Noel's story, but I did sort of say we'd touch on his children. So you're happy to carry on with the children? They're quite interesting. Okay, so Noel's children. As a summary, in the space of 3 years, from 1917 to 1920, Noel had 4 children. Try and work that one out. 3 different women. Remember I said he was married to Esme, Esme Stewart, but they divorced in 1917. In fact, Natter was born in 1917. So I'm not quite sure when the divorce happened, whether it was before her birth or after. I suspect it was probably after. But because she's a legitimate child, we think. She, don't know too much about her, but she did become the Duchess of Caraman, and she was also, that was because she actually married a chap called Jean Victor de Riquet, the 6th Duke de Caraman, who was French nobility, basically. He was a French diplomat, a soldier, and he worked for General de Gaulle. So, yeah, she did quite well for herself, because they were society, by this time. Society. She was also a surrealist painter. That's one of her paintings there. And you notice there, she signed it Noel Macklin, not Noel de Riquet, 6th Duchess. Anyway, she exhibited under the name of Noel Macklin in Monte Carlo, London, Palm Beach. She had 3 children, but they stayed basically in America, and she died in 2012 in Palm Beach. Okay, so she was the firstborn, legitimate. This one, not quite so. You remember that lady in the Eric Campbell car?
Yes.
Yes, Kathleen Sprague. There she is. There's Noel. There's their daughter, Bunty.
Ah.
So Bunty was born in February 1919. Now, Kathleen, as we saw, was in his firm. She was demonstrating the Eric Campbell cars and that 25,000-mile Monza trip and all this. Obviously, a bit more friendly. And the child was a result. He installed her in a house down in Chichester, which used to belong to, I think it was Richard Seaman's birthplace. Driver Richard Seaman down there. So she actually lived down there with Bunty. The child was called Bunty Macklin. She wanted it to be a Macklin. And she sometimes used that name, although they were never married themselves. Don't know much about her. She did marry a Dutchman and she settled in Devon. Lance Macklin. Okay, a lot of people heard of Lance Macklin? Yeah. Okay, I've got some of his things there. Probably best known for the 1955 Le Mans tragedy. He was instrumental in that. But he also drove for Aston Martin, Healy and Bristol. He was educated at Eton as well, because Noel has sort of carried on that tradition. He drove in Formula One for HW Motors and involved in that terrible tragedy where 80 people were killed. There's another picture of him in an HWM at Silverstone in 1953. And the next bit is a short clip of Lance speaking a bit later on about that tragedy in Le Mans.
Lance Macklin, describe as one thing. Just straight past my fourth, and I sort of missed him. I don't know how much, but it was very, very close. I thought I'd hit him at one time, but I just missed him. And I just got the car straightened out and more or less under control again. And then suddenly there was a tremendous bang, and Lebeg's Mercedes came up over the top of the back of me. See, I ended up about, I suppose, 150, 200 yards away from where the accident actually happened. So I didn't see any of the disaster from the point of view of, people who had been killed and injured and so on. And as I was walking along, I saw all these spectators sort of, oohing and eyeing, and sort of saying, oh dear, how terrible, oh, what awful thing. I thought to myself, well, that's what you came here for. You wanted to come and see an accident, well, now you've got a good one.
Doesn't come across very well, does he? That's his attitude. He actually left Formula One racing after that and ended up working as a salesman for a firm called Vega in Paris and also H.R. Owens back in London in the end. So there we are, yeah. Mia. She's much more likeable. Yes. Much more fun. So there we go. These are some of the things that she did. So we'll just quickly run through some of these. She was born in I didn't say when Noel was born, did I? Because that was relevant. Bunty was February 1919. Lance was September 1919. So when Bunty was born, Leslie Cordery was already pregnant with Lance by about 2 months. He was a bit of a boy, wasn't he, really? Okay, Mia. She was born in 1920. What I should say is that, Lance was also illegitimate. Lance was illegitimate as well. He wasn't married to Leslie at that time. So he had 2 illegitimate children and 2 legitimate ones. So he did marry her, Leslie, in 1920, just before Mia was born. So, okay. She was the youngest child. When she was born, Leslie was described as a Monte Carlo socialite. They were one of those. And there's no doubt that the children did have privileged upbringing. Lance went to Eton. Mia and Natter were both schooled at Heathfield's School in Berkshire, which is an exclusive school. And Mia learned initially to skate in Grosvenor House. in London at the Park Lane rink. She was a bit of a child prodigy and appeared in 3 different Sunday Express films called Stars of Destiny when she was at the age of 12 because of her skating, basically. And she was okay. She was quite good at figure skating. She took part in the 1932 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid. She competed in the 1936 European Skating Championships in Berlin, but not the Olympics of the same year. She finished 11th in those. She was 8th in the 1936 World Championships in Paris. And as a 16-year-old, she had a series of photos taken, which this is one which appear in the National Portrait Gallery now. So, she was obviously a bit of a daddy's girl, I think. Just reading between the lines. This is what he bought her this car, gave her this car. It was a smallest Railton in the range, which is only 17 when she turned 17. And note the mascot on the end there, which is a figure skater. So that was her birthday present when she was 17. As a teenager, she was presented to the court of St James. We still did that sort of thing back then, in the 30s. And she was married to Peter Rowland Hodge of the Royal Artillery in 1940. The wedding itself, you can see some pictures of it there. And there's actually the family together in this picture, which is quite nice, with Noel Natter, that's Peter Hodge, Mia, Lance, and Leslie, Noel's wife at the end there. So I quite like that picture, which was taken from that one up there. So, yeah, so what we've got next is actually another little bit of film, just to kind of finish it off with. It shows the church she was married at, which was St Mary's at Stoke-Yappenden, pointing in the right direction, over there. I wonder why they went all the way over there, but then I looked on a map and it is actually the closest church to Fairmile. The other one's down here, is further away. Again, it's quite interesting to look at the backgrounds in this particular film. And it's a film of her wedding. And you've got to look out for various people. I've put little captions up so you can spot them. And it's a colour film, this one. No. The Dr. It's really surprised to find out. And no. Fairmile Cottage in the background. And I like the way at the end she's getting. Yeah. So it was an arranged marriage through the court and society wedding, really. And didn't last very long. They actually divorced in 1945. So it didn't see the end of the war out, basically. Yeah, there he is. Yeah, okay, there she is. What's he doing? A bit of mechanicking there, by the look of it. This is during the war. She drove Blitz buggies. She's sitting on one there, and she was a dispatch driver for the US Air Force. And I'm assuming that these are probably American around her there. Yeah, so she drove these during the war. She was also an ARP warden, so did quite a bit. 6 months after her divorce, surprisingly, she married a US bomber pilot who was also a prisoner of war, World War II POW, called Jack Vitor. Now, That was a swanky high society affair in New York, and she was given away by a Prince Vladimir Reshevisky, who apparently was a renowned Russian racing driver. I've never heard of him. But anyway, she must have been a friend. Marriage was reported by Hedda Hopper, you may have heard of her, and she made a specific note of the short space of time between the divorce and the marriage. Okay. Now, Vita was very high society in America. He was friends with J.F. Kennedy. He drank with Errol Flynn and Dr. Seuss. Very much higher upper echelons there. So, if you just cast your mind back to the original title of this talk, Gunboats to Jell-O, you may be wondering where Jell-O comes in. By now, this is it. This is where Jell-O comes in. Jack Vitor was the heir to his mother's Jell-O fortune. She owned the Jell-O company, which was massive in America. So yeah, she was mixed in now with the Hollywood set, Errol Flynn, the slot. So it was inevitable she was going to get a film contract, wasn't it? She did with 20th Century Fox, but she only made one film, which was Anna and the King of Siam, where she played one of the harem girls in it. Actually, surprisingly, she didn't really go on from there. But they settled in California in a lakeside mansion, and she was featured on water skis. One thing we haven't mentioned yet, she was also a champion water skier for National Geographic magazine. She had 2 children called Neil and Noel. But the marriage actually ended in 1953, and Mia, as part of the divorce settlement, took a large piece of the Jell-O pie with her as a divorce settlement, and she lived the rest of her life in luxury in Beverly Hills, passing away in 2002 at the age of 81. Now, she was a European Championship water skier as well. And we're just going to finish off with a little fun video of Mia water skiing from the Isle of Wight.
Without wishing to alarm holidaymakers, here's an idea for you if you get stranded, say, in the Isle of Wight, the Isle of Man, or the Isle of Arran. Down to the sea on skis, and away you go. Whee, the gentleman had a bad takeoff. But next time, they both get away to a good start, and across the Solent fly Miss Noel Macklin and Mr. Leslie Hardy in an exhilarating journey over the surface of the briny. Stopping is a tricky business, but a convenient diving raft off Seaview provides the necessary haven. They land and carry their skis up the beach amid the congratulations of their friends.
There you go. An alternative way of crossing the Solent to get to the Isle of Wight. So, I don't really know anything surrounding that. I haven't been able to find anything out why it was done. But it's obviously a lot of people watching here. Yeah, I really don't know. But yeah, she was a European Championship skier, as well as everything else. I like me. I think basically, yeah, it is. It's the end. Look at that. There you go.